honor for me because approximately 10 years ago, we had this speaker with us. And I had the privilege of introducing him at that time. He was born in New York City, went to school there, ended up going to Harvard College and graduating from Harvard College. Spent a year at Columbia Law School, and then decided he did not want to continue on with law. He decided that he wanted to devote his time in life to public service. During the Spanish-American War, he formed a group of volunteers called the Rough Riders that were involved, and you all know about them, and so you know a little bit about that background. Well, let's think it's 1918 now. I was not born then, by the way. Let's think it's 1918 now, and he is doing a farewell tour of the country. He has not decided whether to run for political office or not. He has not announced for that, but may consider it. That office might be the presidency, but he's not sure about that. He is willing to take questions from the audience, but only about his time, not our time. So if you have all of those that you were alive in 1918, were you? All those that were alive in 1918, consider some questions for our speaker. It's really an honor, a privilege, and a sincere pleasure to introduce to you Colonel Theodore Roosevelt, Teddy Roosevelt. Colonel?
Thank you. I'm pleased as punch to be here today. I'm not here running for anything. I'm here to defend my record as president. I wish I could tell you that I am president at the moment, but unfortunately, the country is in the hands of an infernal skunk, an abject coward, Woodrow Wilson, supported only by the solid flub-dub and pacifist vote, especially the professional pacifists who didn't take us into the war soon enough, ladies and gentlemen. Excuse me. Yes, this war that just ended, we should have been in it no later than the sinking of the Lusitania, so I'm really here to berate you Minnesotans who supported congressmen such as this Lindbergh fellow from Little Falls. An appropriate name, Little, isn't it, for him, who didn't support, I should say, this just war. And remember, ladies and gentlemen, a just war is always better for a man's soul than a prosperous peace. Someone should write that down. Yes, a just war is always better for a man's soul than a prosperous peace. Germany violated one of the canons of civilization. Yes, civilized powers should never attack fellow civilized powers. When Germany invaded Belgium, it violated that canon of civilization. We should really, and I must say I berate myself, looking back on it, a bare 4 years ago, I should have supported the war immediately. I have to tell you in all seriousness and with a bit of shame on my part that I did not call for war as I should have in September of 1914. But certainly, ladies and gentlemen, no later than the sinking of the Lusitania, you all recall that, don't you? 128 Americans died in the sinking of the Lusitania. Oh, I know. There are all kinds of reports that that ship was carrying contraband. But I don't believe it, and even if it was, the Germans had no business sinking a passenger liner. The German ambassador put advertisements in New York newspapers telling Americans not to get on that ship. What business does the German ambassador have to tell American citizens what to do or what not to do? I would have broken diplomatic relations with Germany had I been president, and I would have sent the German ambassador home. And you know how he would have gotten there? I would have put him on the Lusitania. But what did Wilson do after that ship was sunk? He issued a note holding the Germans strictly accountable for future actions. If it happened again, he might do something about it. But he refused to act when he could. And then his Secretary of State, who was his Secretary of State? You look as though someone who might know this.
Secretary of State in 18?
In 1915.
15.
Yes.
I remember 18. I don't know.
Yes. Taft, no, my successor, Taft, yes. That really, by the way, wasn't his last name. You know that, don't you? Taft, William Howard Taft. It was an acronym. It stands for Take Advice from Theodore. Unfortunately, he didn't do that often enough. But no, it wasn't Taft. He was my hand-picked successor for president. When I decided not to run, I made that announcement on the very night of my victory in 1904. No other vice president who succeeded to the presidency had ever won the office on his own. You know your history. We'll forget about you, sir, but there are others who know their history, don't you? Yes. John Tyler, Millard Fillmore, Andrew Johnson, Chester Arthur, every one of them who became president. Not one of them was able to win on his own. Not one of them even was able to run on his own. But I did it. I won on my own in 1904. And that very night of my victory, I announced that I would not run in 1908. I would have been president for nearly 8 years, having served almost the entirety of William McKinley's second term. And I didn't think anyone ought to be president of the United States longer than Washington himself. Certainly no one named Roosevelt should be president longer than Washington himself. So I didn't run in 1908, and I selected Taft to succeed me. What a darned fool mistake that was. And you know, in fact, I wrote an article published by the American Historical Association criticizing one of my predecessors for doing the same thing. It was a Democrat, one of the only Democrats I really admired. Andrew Jackson. Yes, Andrew Jackson handpicked his successor. And who might that have been? Oh, you know it. You know it. Martin Van Buren, yes. What a mistake that was. And then I went and did the same damn fool thing and pointed my... You know why I admired Jackson? He was only half civilized. That's why I admired him. And besides that, I once read that he wrote somewhere that he didn't have respect for anyone who could think of only one way to spell a word. I liked that. But Taft, you still haven't gotten Wilson's first Secretary of State. You all know him. Everyone in this room knows his name. William Jennings Bryan. Supported only by farmers whose gate hangs on one hinge. A part of the lunatic fringe in this country, if there ever was one. Yes, William Jennings Bryan. Do you know what he did when Wilson announced his policy of strict accountability, holding the Germans responsible for the next time they killed Americans? He resigned. He resigned because he said Wilson threatened to take us into war. I didn't think he had done enough right then to take us into war. Well, I have gone on at some length here already. Even though I'm not running for anything, I am here to feel. You're leaving on you're walking out on a former president, are you? Wearing red, I see. Red, like this fellow over here, red for radicalism. No doubt a member of the lunatic fringe. The Republican Party stands poised between the lunatic fringe on the one hand, the socialists, the syndicalists, the populists, and the wealthy criminal class on the other. Yes, the James J. Hills, right here in Minnesota. Yes, although you know something, I read something that he wrote that I much admired. He once said that a land without people is a wilderness, and a people without land is a mob. He's right about that. And what he was seeking to do, had he not become such a megalomaniac about it, was to help people, the Middle West and the West. I had to take him to court. Yes, what was that? A shot?
Wasn't that you?
Well, good. I have been the victim of an assassination attempt, you know. It was during the Bull Moose campaign in Milwaukee. A German shot me. You're not German, are you? A German saloon keeper shot me. I was on my way to give a speech, and I was shot. I tested my mouth. There was no blood in it. I knew then that my lungs were all right. And so I went off and gave my speech, an hour long at least. Someday you might have a Republican president who gets shot after he gives a speech. It's not half as courageous as what I did. And courage is the first virtue. Nothing else is worth anything if you don't have courage, ladies and gentlemen. Well, do you have questions? Anyone have a question? Yes, sir.
Did you travel in northern Minnesota?
I did, yes. I went the first time when I was still an undergraduate at Harvard. My brother, Elliot. Poor, dear, departed Elliot. Yes, he's gone, of course, but his daughter I gave away in a White House wedding. You might recall her. Eleanor. She married another Roosevelt, a Democrat. I hope we'll never hear much from him. A Democrat by the name of Franklin. He was a state senator at the time, and he has tried to copy me in a number of ways. He's gone on. Currently, I understand he is the Assistant Secretary of the Navy in the Wilson administration, the same position I held in the McKinley administration. And yes, McKinley and Wilson have something in common, yes. They have no more backbone than a chocolate eclair, ladies and gentlemen. But to your question, yes, Elliot and I went out to western Minnesota, Moorhead, and went on hunting expeditions. It was wonderful. I very much appreciated the trip here. And of course, I have been through here many times on my way to the Dakotas, where the romance of my life began, really. I went there for the first time in March of 1884. I was 28 years old. Not even that, I think 26 years old. My mother and my wife, Alice Lee, died on the same day in New York, in our brownstone, in our family brownstone in Manhattan. on Valentine's Day, 1884. Memories like that must be left until they're too dead to throb any longer. We had just become parents. Yes, on Lincoln's birthday, Alice gave birth to a daughter. Alice, you might have heard of her, too. When I was president, I used to say I could either run the country or I could run Alice, but I couldn't do both. She smoked, among other things, and I forbade her from smoking. I ordered her not to smoke under my roof. And you know what she did? She climbed up on the top of the White House and brought photographers along and had herself photographed smoking on top of the White House. Alice. And then she organized race suicide clubs. I had given a speech worrying as I did and still do about race suicide. And she believed in birth control. As far as I can tell, it's coming to mean fewer and fewer births and less control, ladies and gentlemen. But Alice organized these clubs, another thing I couldn't control. So yes, I have been here, and I hope to come here again now that I am at least temporarily in retirement. If the Republican Party doesn't see fit to follow in my footsteps, and there is certainly some indication that they will not follow in my footsteps, I may see fit to run again in 1920. We'll have to wait and see how that works out. Other questions? Yes, sir.
How did you get the nickname Trust Buster?
I think it was mainly because of the Northern Securities case, which involved Mr. Hill. In fact, it was tried right here in St. Paul. Hill and Harriman and J.P. Morgan. J.P. Morgan, you know, by the way, when I went off on my African safari after I left the presidency, do you know what Morgan said to the press? He said, "America hopes that every lion will do its duty." I didn't know that Morgan had a sense of humor. But this Northern Securities Company controlled all of the railroad units in the whole northwest quadrant of the country, from St. Paul to Chicago to Denver, San Francisco, Seattle, all controlled by one gigantic holding company. And so I took them to court to break it up. And we won. Barely, but we won. Right before it went to the court, I had a chance to make my first appointment to the Supreme Court. Now here's a tough one. Who was it? Again, everyone in this room knows the name. Oliver Wendell Holmes. Yes, I quizzed him, by the way, at length on his position on the trusts to make sure that he would be a reliable vote. Convinced as I was, wrongly as it turned out, that he would be just that. When the Northern Securities case was decided, it was a 5-4 case, and Holmes, we won, but Holmes voted against me. You heard me right, against me. He voted against me. I said publicly at a press conference when I gathered all of my, as I called them, the press that is, my praise agents. That was their job, my praise agents. I called them to the White House and said to them, I could carve more backbone out of a banana than out of certain associate justices of the Supreme Court. Oh my goodness, somebody eats right in front of me and they're, oh, no, she's not leaving, all right.
Just doing more of my job as president.
I said I could carve more backbone out of a banana than out of certain associate justices of the Supreme Court. And I struck him from the White House guest list. Never again was he invited to the White House dinner, any White House dinner, until my farewell meal. And I invited Holmes and his wife. We sat them down on either side of me and had a sumptuous meal. And after it was over, out came dessert. And you know what it was? Banana split. It was wonderful. Other questions?
Why did you carry the cane in your left hand?
This is a riding crop, sir. A riding crop. I am a Rough Rider. Do you know what our slogan was, don't you? Rough, tough, we're the stuff. We want to fight, and we can't get enough. That's what I did in Cuba in 1898. Yes, when I had my crowded hour, when I killed a Spaniard with my own hands. I wanted to do the same thing in 1917. I met with President Wilson, pleaded with him to let me organize another contingent of Rough Riders to go to France. Yes, I wanted to do it one more time. And you know what he did? He turned me down. I couldn't believe it. I was talking to his secretary, Joe Tumulty, after that meeting, and I said to Tumulty, didn't the president understand that all I wanted to do was to go to France and die? And you know what Tumulty said? He looked at me and he said, Theodore, did you make that very clear to the president? But instead, my son Quentin died in that war. Another memory must be left until it's too dead to throb any longer. Poor, dear Quentikins. He had eyes like mine. He had to cheat on the eye chart to get into the Air Corps, but that's what he wanted to do. And he was shot down just a bare 4 or 5 months ago in the summer of 1918. All of my boys served in that war. Every one of them served in that war. Wilson liked to take credit because his sons-in-law worked for the YMCA during that war. I said, my daughter, Ethel, worked for the YMCA in that war. Ethel, Elephant Johnny, we called her. She had legs like bedposts. What a wonderful, strong young lady she was and remains. Another question? Yes, sir.
How do you feel about the media, and specifically William Randolph Hearst?
Well, William Randolph Hearst, of course, in 1904, tried to get the Democratic nomination for president. As rich men who think they're full of it, try to get into politics. It's a giant mistake, sir. A giant mistake. He got nowhere, of course, and didn't win the nomination. It angered him the rest of his life. But as long as members of the press do their bidding, of course, which is to say, agree with me, I am certainly fine with them. There was one more over here, yes.
What was so special about Western North Dakota and all this national park stuff?
I'm just going to remove my mustache, if you don't mind. Yes. I wish I could tell you, sir, that I was the first president to create a national park. I can't tell you that. It goes back to even before that, to Yellowstone. That was the first one, but that really was a combination of ambitious men, hotel magnates and railroad magnates who wanted Yellowstone preserved. And I was too young to have been involved with that. And then Yosemite in the 1890s. John Muir and the Sierra Club were responsible for that, and I applaud them. But you see, John Muir really likes to think only in terms of preservation. I see nothing wrong with preservation, but preservation to the exclusion of use can be difficult. Yes, there are times when use must take precedence. Not in every case, of course. During my presidency, there was a conflict over Yosemite involving Hetch Hetchy Valley. After the earthquake in 1906, the city needed a reservoir. And so they wanted to take a piece of Yosemite for the reservoir. I thought it was a good idea, that it was important for the people of that city. But Muir fought me on it. We ultimately prevailed, my position did, but it was during the Wilson administration. It took, 6-7 years to resolve. Use is crucial. But of course preservation is important. I founded the Boone and Crockett Club. after you know who, to preserve the wilderness and to preserve the manly art of hunting at the same time. I wanted to get out there while there were still buffalo left to shoot. Muir asked that I would come with him to Yosemite in 1906 while president, that we camp together, just the two of us for a week. No photographers. I agreed. We had a marvelous time, I must tell you. But I learned something about him. John Muir, the great conservationist, did not know birds. He couldn't tell one bird from the next. I couldn't believe it. Really, ladies and gentlemen, the most wonderful hour of the day is that hour right before sunrise, when you're up drinking your morning coffee and listening to the birds. Edith and I, my wife Edith, we bought a little retreat during my presidency in Albemarle County, Virginia. Pine Knot, we called it. And I went there. The two of us often went there. And I loved that hour right before sunrise. And Muir was tone deaf. He didn't know birds at all. First day I was president, I began charting the birds that were nesting on the White House grounds. I kept a very careful count. 57 different varieties of birds were nesting, I discovered by the end of my presidency. But yes, I do believe in shooting things at the same time. I see no contradiction at all between them. And that really was why I went out to North Dakota the first time I got into ranching. Well, it was really a blizzard that caused the ranch to collapse in 1886, but I would go out there again and again if I could. Is there time? Do we have one more question?
We have a couple more, yes.
Yes, sir.
Why didn't you guys have glasses?
I always have to keep glasses with me. I break any numbers of them. I took at least 10 pairs of glasses with me when I went on my African safari. You see, I can't read, and I have lost all the sight in my left eye. I took a tennis ball in the left eye. Tennis is a marvelous game, but you've never seen a picture of me playing tennis, have you? It was kind of a sissy game, and I didn't want anyone to know that I played tennis. I told Taft, never let yourself be photographed playing golf. If tennis is a sissy game, what does that leave golf as? But Taft did permit, you do see photographs of Taft playing golf. What a terrible mistake that was.
We have one question over there.
Oh, yes, sir. Ma'am, I'm sorry.
Get into trophy hunting, and why?
Why? I got into it as a young boy, really. John Bell, who was James Audubon, I couldn't almost say the word. He was the chief stuffer for Audubon himself. And he taught me taxidermy as a young boy. And I was much attracted to it. I know Edith, my dear wife, says that she doesn't like to have umpteen animals staring down at her at every meal. But amen, you say to that. But I got 296 animals all by myself on my African safari. 296. I believe hunting for sport, hunting for food, hunting for specimens is perfectly legitimate. Yes, sir.
Then can we do nothing about the Spanish flu that's taking thousands of our people?
Well, of course we can. You think I'm an opponent of science? Do you? I'm not.
It's a world pandemic right now.
Well, a world pandemic, you say? Right here in 1918?
1918.
I've heard rumors that something like this might strike, and if it does, we will deal with it. The federal government will deal with it. The age of individualism, of rampant individualism, is over. This is the 20th century. This is the age of action. This is not the age of Thomas Jefferson. Thomas Jefferson was nothing more than a slippery little demagogue, ladies and gentlemen, preaching the notion that the least government is the best possible government. Yes, an activist government on issues like this is terribly important. I trust you would agree with me on that.
Nobody seems to be doing anything. Thousands are dying all over the world, and in the United States.
Well, if I were president, this would I could add this to my list of indictments of Wilson himself.
Colonel, you have time for one more.
Yes, sir.
What were your thoughts behind dropping out of law school?
I was much too much an activist for that. I did go back to law school as vice president. I wrote a letter to the Chief Justice asking permission, wondering if it was constitutionally permissible for the vice president to attend law school. And he approved of this. I had literally nothing to do as vice president under McKinley. I didn't want to be vice president. I was stuck there by the same people who wanted me to run for governor of New York after the Cuban campaign. I was elected governor of New York in 1898. I was all prepared to run for a second term in 1900, but the same people who wanted me to be governor now wanted me gone. I was too much of a reformer. And what better place to bury me, they thought, than in the vice presidency. The boss of New York politics, Senator Platt, said Roosevelt could no more turn down the vice presidency than he could stand under Niagara Falls and spit it back up. And so I was prepared to go to law school again. While I was vice president, and in the midst of all of this, McKinley was shot. And I was suddenly, as his aide Mark Hanna put it, the damn cowboy was now in the White House. Well, let me at the end say this to you, ladies and gentlemen. It is not the critic who counts. It is not the one who points out how the strong man stumbled or how the doer of deeds might have done them better. No, the credit belongs to the man who's actually in the arena, whose face is marred with dust and sweat and blood, who strives valiantly and yet fails again and again, but yet who knows the great emotions, the great devotions, and who spends himself in a worthy cause. So that if he fails, at least he fails while striving greatly, so that his place will never be with those cold and timid souls who know neither victory nor defeat. Thank you very much. Thank you.
I have one more person to introduce, and he is a favorite of mine, and that's Chuck Chalberg. Give him a good another round of applause.
Thank you.
He's, as many of you know, we have a number of Normandale people here, a renowned professor of history at Normandale. He graduated from Regis University. And
Don't forget Brainerd Junior College.
And Brainerd Junior College. But not from the University of Illinois. But anyway, but he then got his master's and his doctorate from the University of Minnesota. He does a number of these things. I have had him do Bobby Jones, Branch Rickey, P.K. Chesterton. He also does George Orwell and who else, Chuck? H.L. Mencken, who I've not heard. And he does them not just locally, but around the country. And something that was sort of interesting, I thought, that Dan Barnett, our former member and former district governor of this district, still gets our email, still gets our newsletter, and sent an email to our president saying that he had taught with Chuck or had been involved with Chuck for over 20 years at Normandale, and also, as I think Karen had in the rib about how Chuck speaks nationally, how Dan had run into someone down in Florida who was from California and heard Chuck speak in California. So we're very fortunate to have him with us. He has written a history of the city of Bloomington. He has written some other books. He is in the papers on occasion, in the Star Tribune as op-ed He's a fellow of the Center of American Experiment and on the board of the Bloomington Historical Society. In addition to all that, he's really a neat guy, and we're honored, Chuck, to have you with us here today.
You can now stand up. So I want to, in appreciation for your speaking presentation today, a donation to End Polio will be made in your name to End Polio Now, which is the signature project of Rotary International.
Can we shift some of the money to deal with the influenza epidemic?
Sure. In the early 1980s, there were 400,000 cases of polio in the world each year, and Rotary decided to join with other organizations to lead the eradication of polio. We are so close to eradicating this devastating disease. In 2015, we have had 66 cases limited to 2 countries. And a year ago, we had like 325 cases in 9 countries. So success over polio will help fuel the energy for what people of the world can do when we work together. And so here is a certificate in honor of your speaking today. And here is an End Polio Now Rotary pin for you. So thank you so much.